Imagine a man who walked through America for 5 decades. A man no one noticed, no one questioned, no one stopped. A man who blended into crowds, slept in back alleys, hitchhiked across states, and vanished the moment he arrived. Now imagine this. Everywhere he went, women disappeared. From Los Angeles to Miami, from Texas to Ohio, from deserts to parking lots, bodies kept showing up, unidentified, unclaimed, unnoticed. Police departments believed these were random crimes, different killers, different motives, different worlds. But there was one truth nobody saw coming. All of them were connected to one man. His name was Samuel Little, a drifter, a boxer, a thief, and the most prolific serial killer in American history. For years, he moved silently through forgotten neighborhoods and broken communities, choosing victims society didn't protect, didn't search for, and in many cases, didn't even record properly. Women who trusted the wrong stranger. Women whose stories were never told. Women who vanished before anyone even realized they were missing. The terrifying part? Samuel Little didn't just kill. He remembered. He remembered every face, every location, every detail, like trophies stored inside his mind. And decades later, when he was finally caught, he sat in front of investigators and calmly described his crimes with chilling clarity, as if he were talking about memories from a road trip, not murders. He drew portraits of the women he killed. He traced maps of highways and alleys. He confessed to 93 murders, more than any killer America has ever seen. But the real question is, how did he get away with this for nearly 50 years? How did so many police departments miss the signs? Most serial killers are remembered because they were caught early, exposed quickly, or left behind dramatic trails of terror. But Samuel Little was different. For more than 4 decades, he walked freely through American streets. Unnoticed, unchallenged, unseen. He moved from city to city like a shadow, drifting through motels, truck stops, alleys, bus stations, homeless shelters, and bars. Never staying long enough to be remembered. Never leaving enough behind to be caught. He was everywhere, yet nowhere. A ghost wearing the face of an ordinary man. Born in 1940 in Georgia, his early life was already marked by instability, a childhood in foster care, abusive environments, and a world that treated him as invisible long before he ever committed a crime. But the most dangerous people are often the ones we stop noticing. And Samuel Little understood invisibility better than anyone. He lived in the underbelly of America, the forgotten neighborhoods, the dimly lit streets, the places where people disappear quietly and no one files a missing report. His victims were women society ignored, women struggling with addiction, homelessness, poverty, trauma. Women who trusted too easily or had nowhere safe to go. Women who were vulnerable because the world didn't think their stories mattered, and that's what made him so deadly. While the FBI hunted high-profile serial killers with clear patterns, clear motives, clear identities, Samuel Little slipped through every crack in the system. He committed crimes that looked like accidents, murders that looked like overdoses, victims who were never identified, cases that were closed before anyone even knew a crime had happened. As the years passed, police departments across different states dealt with cases in isolation, a strangled woman in Los Angeles, an unidentified body in Mississippi, a missing person in Florida, a cold case in Ohio. None were connected. None had fingerprints, witnesses, or confessions. And the killer? He was already gone. Driving the highways in his car, searching for his next victim. By the time authorities finally realized who he was, it was almost too late. He had already lived most of his life in freedom. He had already taken dozens, and eventually we would learn over 90 lives, making him the most prolific serial killer in American history. But this isn't just a story about a murderer. It's a story about systems that failed, communities that were ignored, victims who deserved justice but never received it, and a nation that took decades to understand a monster living quietly in its shadows. To uncover how he operated for so long, how he manipulated people, and how he confessed to crimes that stretched across 19 states. We must start at the very beginning, not with bloodshed, not with crime scenes, but with a man who blended into society so perfectly that no one noticed the darkness inside him. For most people, home is a place. For Samuel Little, home was the road, the endless highways, the cheap motels, the deserted alleys behind neon-lit truck stops. He never settled, never rooted himself in any community, never stayed long enough for people to remember his name. And that was exactly what made him so dangerous. By the mid-1970s, Little had become what detectives would later call a ghost with footprints. He drifted from Ohio to Florida, from Mississippi to California, from the Midwest to the Deep South, always moving, always disappearing before anyone noticed something was wrong. His life had no pattern, no schedule, no structure. But beneath that chaotic exterior, there was a chilling order to the madness. Little knew that the more he moved, the harder it would be for anyone to connect the dots. He picked up small jobs along the way: cemetery worker, delivery man, day laborer. Nothing permanent. Nothing that required background checks or identity papers. He stole when he needed money. He fought when he needed control. He drank when he needed escape. And through it all, people barely remembered him. To most strangers he met, he was just another drifter standing by a gas station. A tall man with quiet eyes, a person who would be gone by morning. But his drifting wasn't just survival, it was strategy. Little learned early that America's justice system was not built to track someone who didn't want to be found. Different states rarely shared information. Police departments didn't talk to each other. Missing person reports from one county often meant nothing in the next. And Little exploited this weakness with chilling precision. He targeted those the world ignored: women living on the margins, battling addiction, trapped in poverty, or estranged from their families. These were people who didn't have safety nets, people who might not be missed right away, people vulnerable to someone who offered a ride, a drink, or a moment of false kindness. Each time he struck, he vanished again, crossing state lines before dawn, leaving behind no address, no friends, no witnesses. His life became a blur of highways stretching across thousands of miles, each road leading him away from his crimes and toward new hunting grounds. Yet, despite all this movement, there was one constant in his life: his need for control. Little wasn't killing for revenge or impulse. He was killing for power, a twisted thrill he chased in every new city he passed through. And as he drifted deeper into America's forgotten corners, one thing became painfully clear: Samuel Little wasn't just escaping his past. He was preparing for something darker, a long, unstoppable killing spree that would eventually make him the most prolific serial killer in American history. He was a drifter to the world, but inside, a predator was sharpening his instincts, waiting for his next opportunity. For nearly a decade, Samuel Little drifted from town to town like a moving shadow, always close enough to watch, always distant enough to disappear. But by the mid-1980s, something began to change. Cities he passed through started to notice a pattern. Women were going missing. Bodies were found in abandoned lots, riverbanks, alleys, and dusty patches of roadside dirt. And yet, no one connected them to the same man, at least not yet. Across the country, detectives sat in dimly lit offices, staring at photographs of unidentified victims. Many were women living on society's edge, women police departments often overlooked. Some struggled with addiction. Some were homeless. Some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the one constant in every case was this: the killer left almost no trace of himself. The strangest detail was always the same: no obvious signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no fingerprints, no weapon. Medical examiners wrote undetermined cause of death again and again. Without bruises or cuts, the cases slipped through cracks, filed away as accidents or overdoses. But a few detectives sensed something far darker. In Mississippi, a young officer noticed two women found just weeks apart but both with the same unusual bruising on the neck. In Florida, a sheriff's deputy realized that women who had gone missing from bus stations and parking lots seemed to vanish after the same stranger was seen nearby. In Los Angeles, a veteran detective saw a chilling pattern. The victims all looked similar, small-framed, vulnerable, struggling, alone. They didn't know his name. They didn't know his face. But the shape of the predator was beginning to form. As suspicions grew, so did the whispers across departments. Police radios carry fragments of the same questions. Is this connected? Could it be the same killer? Is someone hunting these women? But the biggest obstacle was distance. Samuel Little wasn't a local threat, he was everywhere. He traveled constantly, crossing state lines with ease. One week in Texas, another in Ohio, then suddenly in Nevada or Louisiana. His wandering lifestyle made him almost impossible to track. Time after time, detectives found themselves investigating a ghost. And while they chased leads that went nowhere, Samuel kept moving. He watched the police too, always alert, always adjusting. If he sensed officers growing suspicious in one town, he simply packed up and left. His car became both a hunting ground and a hiding place. Inside it, he kept his tools, his memories, and the disturbing confidence that he would never be caught. The hunt had begun. But it was a hunt with no face, no identity, and no name. Across America, law enforcement was circling closer without realizing it. Patterns were emerging. Voices were rising. Investigators were unknowingly following the trail of the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. But before they would ever catch him, Samuel Little would slip through their fingers again and claim more lives in the dark corners of a country that didn't yet realize the magnitude of the monster it was facing. For more than 3 decades, Samuel Little drifted across America like a shadow, silent, unnoticed, unstoppable. But what allowed him to continue for so long wasn't just his ability to disappear. It was something far more tragic. The voices of his victims were ignored. In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, America was a very different place, especially for the marginalized. Women who lived on the edges of society, those struggling with addiction, homelessness, poverty, or simply caught in the wrong circumstances were rarely treated with dignity. Many were black women. Many were sex workers. Many had no family to fight for them. To the world, they were invisible. To Samuel Little, they were targets. And yet, despite society's indifference, these women did fight. They tried to escape him. They tried to report him. They tried to survive him. Some almost did. One survivor whose story would later become crucial escaped his grip in the early 1980s. She remembered the smell of alcohol on his breath, the crushing pressure of his hands around her neck, the terrifying moment she lost consciousness. But she didn't die. She woke up on the ground, bruised, bleeding, barely able to breathe. She went to the police. And they didn't believe her. Her attacker was a tall, calm man with a charming smile and a criminal record full of small offenses. He told officers she was a junkie, a prostitute, someone looking for attention. And in a world poisoned by prejudice and stereotypes, his word carried weight. Her case was quietly dismissed. This wasn't an isolated event. Again and again, women reported attacks, strangulation, assault, attempted murder, and again, they were ignored, brushed aside, or blamed. Some officers didn't file reports. Some hospitals treated injuries without asking questions. Some families didn't even know their daughters were missing. Each time a woman's voice was silenced, Samuel Little gained more confidence, more opportunity, more time. He learned a devastating truth about the system. If society doesn't care about your victims, it doesn't care about catching you. And yet, despite all this, there were women who refused to be forgotten. A few survivors kept repeating their stories, even when no one believed them. A few mothers continued searching for daughters long after the police gave up. A few community activists documented disappearances the authorities ignored. And in the early 1990s, a young female detective in California began noticing a disturbing pattern: cases everyone else had dismissed as drug overdoses or accidents. She believed something else was happening. Something darker. Something organized. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know his face. But she knew that these women, ignored by nearly everyone, were being killed the same way, one by one, city by city, year after year. These women may not have had power, but they had something far stronger. They had the truth. And eventually, after decades of silence, their truth would begin to crack the walls around a killer who believed he would never be caught. Because the story of Samuel Little is not just a story about a murderer. It is a story about women whose voices finally forced the world to listen, even if it took far too long. For decades, Samuel Little moved from city to city, leaving behind a silent trail of victims, women whose stories were erased almost as soon as they ended. But what is most shocking is not just the scale of his crimes. It's how many times authorities had the chance to catch him and failed. The truth is painful. Samuel Little did not stay free because he was clever. He stayed free because the system was broken. The first missed clue came in the 1970s, when Little was arrested in Florida after a woman claimed he tried to kill her in his car. She escaped with bruises on her neck and terror in her eyes. She told the police everything: his face, his license plate, the way he wrapped his hands around her throat. But the case fell apart because she had a criminal record. Prosecutors believed the jury wouldn't trust her. Little walked free. Then, in Mississippi, another woman reported the same thing, same pattern, same violence. She survived, but her case was dismissed because she was considered unreliable. That one decision cost dozens of women their lives. No one connected the cases. No one thought these women mattered enough to investigate carefully. Again and again, Samuel Little was arrested for kidnapping, assault, theft, breaking and entering, but never held long enough for investigators to see the bigger picture. His crimes were spread across different states, different jurisdictions, different databases. Police in one city had no idea what police in another city already knew. Every time he moved, his past practically disappeared. Then came the 1984 San Diego case, where he was caught with a woman beaten nearly to death in his car. She survived long enough to testify. Little was convicted, but only served 2.5 years. When he was released, he didn't go into hiding. He simply went back to killing. The next major clue appeared in Los Angeles in 1989. 3 women were found strangled, each dumped in an alley or abandoned lot. The evidence pointed toward one man, the same man who had been arrested again and again for similar crimes. But DNA technology was still young, and the samples were too degraded. Another chance lost. The most heartbreaking truth is this: many of Samuel Little's victims were women society ignored. They were poor. They struggled with addiction. Many were Black women whose disappearances were not treated as emergencies. Some families were told, "She'd come back," even when they insisted something was wrong. Serial killers thrive in silence, and America was silent for far too long. Looking back now, investigators admit the pattern was there, clear, consistent, unmistakable. A man drifting across the country, picking vulnerable women, using the same method every time. Yet, because no one connected the dots, Samuel Little continued killing for nearly 40 years. The missed clues weren't small mistakes. They were systemic failures, failures that cost dozens of innocent women their lives. And it would take a single routine arrest, many years later, to finally expose the monster hiding behind those missed chances. For decades, Samuel Little managed to pass through American society like a shadow never noticed, never questioned, never stopped. But to understand how he evaded justice for so long, we must look closely at the persona he created. Because Samuel Little didn't just hide his crimes, he hid behind a smile. The man many victims met wasn't a monster on the surface. He was charming, smooth-talking, friendly. The kind of person who could walk into any bar, bus station, or motel parking lot and start a conversation as if he belonged there. He called everyone darling, laughed easily, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew how to read people instantly. This charm was his camouflage. Behind that calm voice and slow, friendly smile lived one of the most violent killers America has ever known. But no one could see it, not at first. When police officers stopped him during routine checks, they didn't see danger. They saw a homeless drifter, maybe a petty thief. Someone who had been arrested before, sure, but nothing big. A man who always seemed to slip away because he answered calmly, politely, and never fought back. Even detectives who interviewed him later admitted they never imagined he was capable of so much violence. His eyes were soft, his tone gentle. He made small jokes to relax the room. He looked like someone who needed help, not someone who destroyed lives. But this soft exterior hid a boiling rage. Samuel Little had a pattern. He targeted the women society ignored: sex workers, addicts, runaways, and loners. Women who didn't have families searching for them. Women whose disappearances rarely made news. Women the police departments of the 70s, 80s, and 90s overlooked. To Little, these women were invisible. And he believed that made him invisible too. He understood police weaknesses. He knew that if he moved constantly from Los Angeles to Miami, from Houston to Cincinnati, no department would ever connect the dots. Every new town was a reset button. Every new state erased his trail. He also learned how to erase evidence. He used strangulation, avoiding weapons or tools that left clear forensic signs. He often left bodies in remote places, woods, alleys, abandoned lots where animals and weather destroyed clues long before anyone found them. This was not a man who killed randomly. He studied, selected, and planned. He watched his victims' routines, learned their vulnerabilities, and struck when he knew no one would intervene. And when he was finished, he walked away calmly, quietly, as if nothing had happened. A soft-spoken stranger disappearing into the night. His confidence grew with every kill. He believed he was smarter than the police. He believed he couldn't be caught, and for more than 40 years, he was right. Because America wasn't just chasing a killer, it was chasing a ghost crafted by Samuel Little himself. A ghost wrapped in charm, hidden behind politeness, and protected by a system that failed to look closely. By the time law enforcement realized the scale of his violence, it was already too late. Dozens of women were gone. Dozens more had never been found. And Samuel Little, smiling, calm, collected, had moved on to his next city, his next victim, his next escape. The greatest danger is often the one disguised behind kindness. And Samuel Little perfected that disguise. By the late 1990s, the name Samuel Little still meant nothing to the public. He was just another drifter, moving silently from one forgotten town to another. But inside police departments across America, something unusual was happening. A pattern was beginning to emerge. A pattern so faint, so scattered, so buried under decades of paperwork that almost no one noticed at first. But the web was tightening. It started with a handful of detectives who refused to ignore the uneasy similarities in certain unsolved cases. Across states like Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, Ohio, Arizona, and California, officers were seeing reports that looked strangely alike. Black women found in alleys or abandoned lots, no gunshot wounds, no stabbing. Death ruled as overdose, accident, or undetermined bodies moved post-mortem, no signs of struggle for years. These cases had been dismissed because the victims were women society rarely paid attention to: sex workers, addicts, runaways, and women living on the margins. But now new forensic teams were stepping in. And they were asking one question: how can so many women die the same way? In so many states, for so many years? It was the first time anyone looked beyond the borders of a single city. Someone started connecting dots on a map, and the picture was horrifying. Nearly every dotted point aligned perfectly with the known travel roads of a single man, Samuel Little. The drifter who had been arrested countless times yet never held for murder. It was a web of victims stretching across America, and in the center of that web, he had been hiding for decades. Meanwhile, Samuel continued living his double life. He charmed people easily, smiled often, cracked jokes, called everyone darling. To the public, he was harmless. To police, he was forgettable. To his victims, he was the last face they ever saw. But time was running out. In 2012, everything changed when police in Kentucky picked him up on a drug charge. Routine arrest, nothing special. But as part of standard procedure, they took his DNA. That single sample triggered a match in a national database. A hit connected Samuel Little to unsolved murders in Los Angeles from the late 1980s. Suddenly, detectives realized they weren't dealing with a drifter. They were dealing with someone far more dangerous, a man who had slipped through the cracks of America's justice system for 4 decades. The FBI stepped in. California detectives reopened their cold cases. Texas investigators requested transfers. One by one, old files long buried in dusty archives were pulled out again. And for the first time, entire departments began sharing information. Victim lists were compared. Crime scenes were reviewed. Surviving witnesses were interviewed again. Journalists picked up the scent. Pressure increased. Samuel Little had spent most of his life slipping through the gaps. But now, every gap was closing. The web that had once allowed him to roam freely was finally tightening around him. And the man who believed he was invisible was about to be seen more clearly than ever before. For decades, Samuel Little drifted across America like a shadow, leaving behind broken lives, unanswered questions, and case files that grew cold before investigators even knew what they were looking for. For the longest time, he seemed untouchable. Arrested again and again, questioned by police in dozens of cities, yet always slipping through the cracks. He lived in the blind spots of the system until the day everything changed. It began with a single conversation inside a Texas interrogation room in 2018. Samuel Little, now in his late 70s, sat hunched over the table, frail, old, but with eyes that still held something unsettling. Investigators had already linked him to 3 murders through DNA, but they sensed there was more. Much more. And then, almost casually, Samuel opened the door to one of the darkest revelations in American criminal history. He leaned forward and said quietly, "I've done a lot more than you think." Those were the words that shattered decades of silence. Detectives stared at him, unsure whether he was lying, bragging, or simply trying to negotiate his own comfort in prison. But Samuel wasn't smiling. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't confused. In a calm, steady voice, like a man describing his morning routine, Samuel began recounting murders no one had ever connected to him. Not 3, not 10, not 20. He said he had killed over 90 women. The room froze. No dramatic outburst, no remorse. Just a man calmly describing crimes he had carried inside him for 50 years. He explained where he picked up his victims, how he chose them, how he avoided detection, and how he remembered every face, every street, every detail. Investigators quickly realized something chilling. This man had the memory of a camera. He described clothing, earrings, scars, specific city blocks. He even sketched the faces of women he claimed to have killed, portraits so precise that detectives later used them to reopen cases. As the days passed, interviews turned into confessions. Confessions turned into maps. And those maps became a trail stretching across America from California to Ohio, from Florida to Texas, every red dot representing a life erased. What shocked investigators most was not the number, but the accuracy. Samuel remembered cities that no one had connected to each other. He names victims who had been listed as overdoses, accidents, or simply missing. He pointed out bodies that had never been found. Slowly, painfully, police departments across the country began matching his memories to real cold cases, and the matches kept coming. One by one, families who had waited decades for answers finally heard the truth, sometimes comforting, sometimes unbearable. For some, Samuel's confession brought closure. For many others, it opened wounds they had tried to forget. The FBI eventually declared him the most prolific serial killer in American history. And yet, what shocked America wasn't just the scale of his crimes, it was how easily he moved through society, unnoticed, unreported, and unpunished for so long. His confession didn't just reveal murders. It revealed the failures that had allowed him to continue, the victims who were ignored, the cases dismissed, the lives forgotten. And now, for the first time, the world knew the truth straight from the man who had spent a lifetime hiding it. For decades, the stories of Samuel Little's victims lived only in silence, hidden in dusty police boxes, misfiled reports, old morgue drawers, and memories of families who never got answers. When Little finally confessed to more than 90 murders, the numbers shocked America. But the deeper tragedy lay in who these victims were and why their disappearances never made national news. Most of Samuel Little's victims were women who lived on the margins of society, women struggling with addiction, poverty, homelessness, or abusive relationships. Many were women of color, some were sex workers, several had no stable family support. In the eyes of the system, these women were seen as unlikely to be missed, and Little knew that. He hunted exactly where authorities looked the least. These weren't nameless people. They were daughters, mothers, friends, each with a life full of dreams, pain, and small victories. But their stories were buried under stereotypes that shaped how police departments handled their disappearances. Many families reported them missing, only to be told, "Maybe she ran away. She come back. We can't file a report yet." Because of this, dozens of Little's victims were never even classified as homicides. Bodies found in rivers, alleys, drainage ditches, or abandoned lots were often labeled undetermined cause of death, or, worse, overdose, even when the evidence didn't match. In several cases, autopsy reports reveal clear signs of strangulation, but the lack of bruising led coroners to declare the deaths natural. Little understood this flaw. He strangled carefully, often supporting the neck in ways that left minimal marks. He had studied how the system worked and how it failed. Across different states, detectives worked these cases in isolation. No national database. No interdepartment cooperation. No one connecting the dots. A woman killed in Mississippi might have had a similar case in Florida or California, but the files sat in different cabinets in different states, each forgotten as police departments moved on to newer crimes. Little took advantage of this fragmentation. He drifted from state to state, confident that nobody was looking for a pattern. For the families, the pain was unimaginable. Mothers died without knowing what happened to their daughters. Children grew up believing their mothers abandoned them, when in reality, they had been taken by a predator no one was hunting. The grief didn't fade. It hardened into confusion, guilt, unanswered questions, an emotional wound that stretched across generations. When the FBI finally connected with Samuel Little in 2018, everything changed. His confessions weren't short, cold statements. They were vivid, almost photographic memories. He remembered faces, clothing, streets, even weather. For investigators, it was eerie. He described victims with more detail than the police reports ever did. And tragically, many of his descriptions were the only record these women had left in the world. The truth hit America hard. Samuel Little didn't just kill dozens of women, he exposed a system that failed to protect the most vulnerable. For the first time, investigators began reconstructing the lives of these forgotten victims, giving them names, dignity, and the recognition they deserved. And as their stories resurfaced, America had to confront an uncomfortable reality. These women were not forgotten because they were unimportant. They were forgotten because society chose not to see them. Their stories now stand as a powerful reminder that every life, no matter how marginalized, deserves justice. Samuel Little's death in 2020 didn't close the chapter on his crimes. If anything, It opened a deeper, more painful truth, one that America is still struggling to confront. Because Samuel Little wasn't just another serial killer. He was the most prolific murderer in American history, a man who confessed to 93 killings over 4 decades. And yet, the real question isn't how many he killed. The real question is, how did he get away with it for so long? That is the legacy America is forced to confront. For decades, Little drifted across states: Texas, California, Florida, Ohio, Kentucky, Mississippi, Louisiana. He never stayed long enough to become familiar, never left enough evidence to be tracked, never targeted victims society protected. Instead, he targeted the vulnerable. Women living on the edges. Women with no stable homes. Women with addictions, poverty, trauma. Women the system ignored. And the legacy of Samuel Little forces America to ask a painful question. If those women had been wealthy, protected, or powerful, would he have been caught decades earlier? Because again and again, police reports were ignored. Evidence was misplaced. Witnesses weren't believed. And victims weren't prioritized. This is the real horror of his legacy. Samuel Little thrived because the system made space for monsters like him to hide. But there is another side to his legacy, the side built by the people who refused to let these forgotten women stay forgotten. Detectives, cold case units, and forensic analysts across the country dedicated years to connecting his victims. Journalists dug up old files. Communities reopened cold graves. And the FBI created one of the most ambitious projects in its history, a nationwide effort to match Samuel Little's memories with real victims. His hand-drawn portraits, chilling detailed sketches of the women he killed, became a tool for justice. They were the only memorials many of his victims ever received. In those drawings, families recognized daughters they had lost. Sisters identified loved ones they never got to bury. Cases once forgotten suddenly had names, faces, and stories again. This painful, heartbreaking process became part of his legacy, not because it glorified him, but because it restored dignity to the lives he tried to erase. And then comes the final lesson. Samuel Little didn't kill with genius. He didn't escape with intelligence. He slipped through cracks that should never have existed. His legacy exposes a truth America cannot ignore. When a society fails to protect its most vulnerable, it creates space for predators. So the story of Samuel Little isn't just about a serial killer. It's about the victims who deserved better. The families who never stopped fighting. The officers who refused to give up. And a country forced to look closely at a justice system that failed for decades. His legacy is not his crimes, but the reckoning that came after. A reckoning that reminds us, no life is too small to matter. No victim deserves to be forgotten. And no system can call itself just if it only protects the privileged.